Greetings, fellow hitchhikers. Today I am going to attempt to map out some of the key features of Eld. Now, what I'm doing is taking the captured record called the Road of the Warpath Pilgrim, interpreting it the best I can. Now, some of these things will be completely wrong, like old maps of old. Some things are kind of my guesses. There's a couple errors that I've already identified that I'll show you when I get to them. It was fun. I did ask in the Discord whether or not this was, an accurate account, and I got this response. At some point, the map will have to be approximate because some of the areas do not exist all the time. Unreliable narrators mixed up with unreliable planet mixed with unreliable sunlight. The words can literally speak places into existence. You'll notice that everything the Pilgrim's story when it comes to Locrians is shifting constantly. This is a smaller version of this idea. Their moon magic keeps a tide of buildings and land going, sort of like the ocean in real life. The Locrians are so good at it that they just do it in the background all the time. I'm going to be a little bit more literal, just sort of as our narrator laid out their adventure, sort of describe within this map the things that were encountered and seen or spoken into existence or interpreted as they were on this pilgrimage. I don't have a name for our main character other than the Warpath Pilgrim. There definitely is a theme of abandoned war machines and whatnot throughout this journey. I do have one line from the story where he says, "I take reprieve from this phony retirement." So I don't know if it's like our main character is dead and sort of coming out of being dead, or what a phony retirement would mean, or maybe they're just, like everyone, retired but not really retired. He does describe himself as an old man and a pilgrim of the warpath. On this journey that he goes on, it's to get a little bit of gem from each city. So he wants to get to all three main cities in order to get a piece of the gem. The paths that he goes along, or he says, are paths made by trimmers, are a promise of safety kept in a coin flip. So there is Riley cats and red banditos and things like that could be dangerous along the path, but we don't really encounter too many of them within this journey, but it is a dangerous journey nonetheless. Like most of the captured records, there seems to be a reference to the Presence War. I don't have a full handle on what that was about. I think it's something that happened between the three main factions, and it happened sort of in the previous generation. So there are people still alive that do remember or participated in the Presence War, but it seems to have come to an end. And I think that's much of the war machines and debris and scars on the land come from the Presence War, but I don't know that for certain. Okay, our journey starts sort of outside the ice plains of Elskagaard. So I'll zoom in a little bit. Heads northerly in direction. As you go north, or as our pilgrim goes north, through the ice plains and avoiding the ice crevices, there's lots of ice crevices and cracks and whatnot in these ice plains, works his way towards Elskagaard. And he describes the towers and buildings as quirky yet efficient towers. I'm not sure my little sketch here is very efficient, but I tried to draw some quirkiness. I also tried to show the grid-like structure of the locomotives and transportation. And, of course, I drew this very grand tower that's part of the lore package of our current leader of Elskagaard. I didn't draw anyone falling or up in the clouds where he saw those visions. But anyways, so far north we have Elskagaard. Our main character also describes there being sort of a blue or cobalt blue hue throughout the skyline. That is from the exhaust of the sapphire. So he calls it the exhaust of the sapphire. And this, of course, we know as the steadfast sapphire. And Elskagaardians pretty much have sapphire in everything that they build. It's almost like the vibranium that you have in Wakanda locations of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's kind of like that. It powers everything. It can be used for everything. Anyways, Elskagaard uses this steadfast sapphire in much the same way. After getting his steadfast sapphire, he starts a journey going, which feels like south. I kind of imagine there being an ocean along the shoreline or along the edge of Elskagaard, in part because of the octopus symbol that they have. And he even makes reference to these sort of furry octopus creatures, which I think is actually just people that are wearing fur coats and maybe an octopus symbol on the jacket or whatnot. Anyways, he heads down, and it's a many weeks of walking, or several weeks of walking, so I'm going to say maybe 1,000 kilometers or so. He makes his way to Third Rock Mountain. There's a reference there to the Operation Havenward which was a battle of some sort that happened in around Third Rock Mountain, I believe. And there's lots of artillery blast scars and abandoned weapons of war and blast craters and all these kind of things in through this mountain range. I tried to connect it to the rise of Princess Yanni, who was up on Sensory Peak near Red Creek and Rockbound Lake. I kind of, with that Rock Mountain, Third Rock Mountain, Rockbound Lake, I kind of made a connection in my mind there. I could be wrong on that, but I imagine there's this mountain range kind of area. Out in the further distance, we have the Lunar Ruby that grows and expands through the moonlight. I don't think this is where the Puncture Gardens are anymore. I kind of had them there. That it gets referenced inside this story. I think the Puncture Gardens are actually a little bit more here to the east of the Locrian Empire, kind of just below Greer's Lot, an area that you'd have to go through to carry on to the east. Anyways, so our pilgrim is working his way down through the mountains, many weeks of travel, through an area of woods, and gets to Greer's Lot, and talks about Greer's Lot being filled with equipment and filth and twisted metal and so on as he gets closer and closer to the Locrian Empire. And after leaving the abandoned and looted machines of war, gets closer and closer to get what he calls his blood tier, effectively a piece of the Lunar Ruby. He describes it this way: along that walk to the basin to get my blood tier, I turn to the longest stretch of the city that isn't in motion. The structures of the Locrian Empire are laid bare and long, emanating power and control without sound. I am then stopped by a crowd merging with an entourage. Come way the largest church. So we have some people kind of almost marching in, like you'd see like in a cult-like fashion, I guess, a leader and robes and people following. We have various religious type structures and buildings. These buildings are the sleeping lords for the folks of this capital and demand eyes and oohs and ahs for their dreams. The word is writ on nearly everything. I mean, we know that from their tattooing of the bodies. I'd imagine there's lots of words and scripture written all over their buildings as well. There's mention of a basin, so I'm kind of imagining a large lake, though it may or may not be real. Maybe it's a bit of a fog of war or a fog of religion, but there's this large lake. It's got a sandy bottom on which he's able to, it sometimes goes sandy. I don't know if they have water pipes or if they drain it or if they kind of create the lake temporarily and then it disappears. I don't fully know, but either way, it's from here that he gets his bits of ruby. And the city is called Harbor City, so that's why I'm imagining it's on the edge of this lake that's in the bottom of a large basin. And there's also a citadel called the Harbor Citadel. As our pilgrim leaves the Locrian area, he goes past many, many monuments. There's monuments that kind of spew their way towards Arborea. The path between the Locrian Empire and Arborea he calls the pilgrimage beaten path. So it indicates that there is some sort of path that pilgrims might go along or some sort of connection between these two empires. Of course, it's a very dangerous path, and our pilgrim does make mention that I've killed for food and to borrow a bit more time, most all done with just my own Mars revolver. Now, I'll pause there for a second. We had our Jupiter gun, cannon kind of weapon in another story. Now we have a Mars revolver. I find it interesting that these weapons are named after the planets in our solar system. Anyways, he goes on. Queer though, these things capturing my words didn't seem to pick up any of it. So this is a captured record, but it didn't capture all of his adventures of trying to get food and money and survival. As he goes, in my mind, to the east along this beaten path, he comes to an area that's called Neck of Eld. So what I've did is I've kind of drawn the ocean in to kind of make this narrow, almost like a peninsula kind of scenario where the only way to get to Arborea is through this neck, this narrow part. And in this narrow part, it's filled with the Gush Marshes. And the description of the Gush Marshes filled with rot and sort of decaying organic material really makes me think of Krull. You know the scene in Krull where you got the marsh and the one person's tricking the other person, you don't know which one's real, they got the changelings and stuff like that, and the Cyclops. Anyways, that's what came to my mind as he was going through the Gush Marshes. After the Gush Marshes, you get to Arbor's Woods, so you start to get to a forested treed area. He calls these treed area kind of like a pamphlet for the folks and the ideas of the elder tree, which we know isn't actually a real tree. So a sort of false pamphlet promising you something that isn't really going to be ahead. And he actually even talks about these trees, and whether this is true or not, it's a pretty cool idea. The trees pick up vibrations and can set off alarms. Bushwhackers know you're in their neck of the place, and they can also emit toxins to sicken or sleep you, or put out pheromones to attract blood-hungry wildlife. So the trees are almost all like booby traps, or alive and aware. And as you get through this forest, you can see the large elder tree, which our pilgrim refers to as a joke that overstayed its punchline. It's a house for all arborea with the emerald inside, fitted and stitched together out of tree scraps and board that likely meant the death of countless true arbors and critters. The elder tree sure casts a shadow. And we have references to shadow in many different spots, both literal shadow and just this kind of idea of presence and, being noticed and not noticed. So the word shadow through a lot of the lore is common and it seems to have multiple meanings. And then as you get closer to the elder tree, there's a reference to this rose garden. Flowers and plant life of all types all seem to have been stolen from a giant's garden and act as various annex to the tree, some with use and some for show. A rolling field of perfectly tended roses can be seen, a place the girl herself. And as he goes on, he gets interrupted. We have some interactions with him and some of the other caretakers, I believe. Or at least it's an enemy that interrupts him. And he mentions that she gives him a bit of the gem. So he's like, I'm out of here. I got what I came for. Piece of the stone. So that gives him all three stones. The piece from the withering emerald being the third piece. So he decides he's going to head off from there. And he's going to go to what he calls the Pearl of Eld, which I'm imagining to be south. Now, it's not actually a pearl. We do find out that it's made of quartz, but he calls it a pearl because it's quite white. And doesn't really give us a full sense of how long the journey is, but that the journey is difficult in a way in that like everything works against you. Things are stubborn along the way, even the animals. And we get a little bit of insight into the purpose of the pilgrimage. He says, the purpose of the pilgrimage is to honor men's souls lost to battle with our memory and the fire make along the road. In that mind, the Odyssey is a blood ritual, the exchange of blood let from beasts or men turned to killing as a tool and a hobby. They become sacrifices for men who died long ago with homes and reasons to return to them. Every life I take, I try taking a bit of it with me. I don't want to cheapen those sacrifices for myself and for the deserved men long joined with soot. So is the pilgrim death of some sort? I don't know. Maybe is that too easy of an explanation? Something going on there. Either way, he works his way through the field and you start to see a lot of abandoned clothes and almost abandoned reason and abandoned security and your basic needs start to go out the window and people start to become a little bit more delusional. There's the smell of salt and even the taste, to the point that it's taste of salt. I was half expecting it to be sulfur, like a hell-like place, but it's salt. And there's a spillway outside of these, I'm imagining to be large quartz or large crystal structures into almost like a cave-like or underground setting. This is where I really started to get a feeling of the dark crystal. They all, it's like we've got this missing shard. It's like a corrupted crystal that is filled with evil. And if we can just return that pure shard, it'll all come back to being proper again. At least those are the visions I got in my mind as we were entering the Pearl of Eld. I kept thinking this elusive place that can exist at different points in time. You have to get there at the right spot that can be spoken into existence. I'm like, this reminds me of the Dark Crystal. Either way, he gets into the Pearl of Eld, and our character there, our gemstone, our minor gemstone, maybe merged with a person. Don't fully have it. It's not one of the major gems, maybe a minor gem. He refers to as a she, and he says, she's desecrated with filth, blood from the lunatic fists, human waste smeared across the gem that holds her in the stasis. I get to cleaning her. So there's this gem person who he calls the Pearl, and he cleans all the blood and the waste and the filth off of her, and he falls asleep at her feet, closes his eyes, and eventually he wakes to the sound of his own revolver, his Mars revolver, basically being clicked and ready to shoot, he gets the gun and he moves all these bits of jewelry and bauble off to the mock floor, and she draws him to her kind of, I don't know, in a mental way or an emotional way, and they kind of connect. He mentions that I could break this jewel she's in and kill her, of course, trying to call it mercy, but I can't. Call me a coward, but I've killed far too much, and she's above any man or woman who's taken up the piloting or gun. So he leaves her, but leaves her clean, leaves her kind of restored. The people that have lost their minds and their clothes kind of seem to be calmer and a bit more at peace and feeling stable again, and maybe like their minds have been cleaned up. And our pilgrim heads back out and looks to the north. We do get a reference, though, that the far south is a lot of wilderness down in here and wild animals. Of course, there's wild animals everywhere, but the far south seems to be less tamed than these other areas, as far as I can tell right now. So I hope that was helpful. I don't know if it's correct or not, but it gave me a little bit of appreciation for the geography and the landmarks of Eld, as how I'm currently envisioning it. I look forward to getting bits more information on maybe other places, or how I can correct or improve this map. But this is what I have so far. So I hope you enjoyed that. I know I enjoyed getting some description images in my mind, and I enjoyed this account. I look forward to learning more and more. Either way, on your adventures, keep track of your towels and don't panic.